Imagine this. You're standing at the doorway of a house that no longer exists. The wood is thin, sun-bleached and warm under your hand. It creaks the same way it did when you were 10, maybe 11. And suddenly, without warning, the scent of a 1970s summer washes over you. That warm blend of freshly cut grass, dusty sidewalks, and a kind of freedom kids today will never understand. The street was our map, the neighborhood our kingdom, and every corner hid a new secret. No one hovered over us, no one tracked us. The only rule was to be home before the streetlights blinked on, and even that sometimes was negotiable. Time didn't rush in those days. It drifted, softly, patiently, without fear. Every sound was alive, every sound carried a story, and I feel them all on my skin, like the warm breeze of those late afternoons is brushing across my arms again. You didn't need much to feel whole. A pair of worn-out sneakers, a bike that had survived more crashes than triumphs, and the entire world stretched out in front of you. Today, almost none of that remains. The streets are quiet, but not with the peaceful silence we knew. Now it's a hollow, digital quiet. And sometimes I wonder if we were the last children who truly knew what freedom tasted like. A version of you that the world has long forgotten, but your heart never did. I can still feel the weight of those mornings in the 1970s, the slow, golden kind that seemed to stretch forever before the day even began. I'd wake up to the soft rattle of a fan in the window, pulling in air that smelled like sun-baked asphalt and distant pine trees. No alarms, no notifications, just the gentle hum of a world waking up with me, and for a moment, lying there in that small bedroom with its faded curtains and peeling posters, I felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for me to step outside. I'd sit on the edge of my bed, lace up my sneakers, always dusty, always worn, and listen to the house settling, the refrigerator clicking, the floorboards giving a soft groan, the distant clatter of my mother in the kitchen. It was a soundtrack of comfort, a reminder that life didn't need to shout to be full. Sometimes I'd pause just to let the stillness sink in, because even as a kid, I felt there was something sacred in the quiet. The neighborhood smelled of morning newspapers, garden hoses left running, and the faint tang of gasoline from someone mowing their lawn. And every time, without fail, I'd hear the laughter of kids already out on their bikes, echoing across the yards like invitations. You didn't text anyone, you didn't plan. You just listened and followed the sound of freedom. You could taste the world, a mix of dust, humidity, and the faint sweetness of someone's laundry drying on a clothesline. And as the wind rushed past, it felt like the streets themselves were whispering, "Go, explore, don't look back." The only thing we cared about was how far we could get before noon. Sometimes we'd ride out to the creek, where the water moved slow and the rocks were smooth from decades of footsteps. The place always smelled like wet earth and sun-warmed moss. We'd skip stones, chase minnows, and lie on the bank staring at the sky, endless blue, untouched by the wires and satellites that clutter it today. There was something deeply human about it, something that stitched us together without us even realizing it. In the 70s, you could disappear for hours and nobody panicked. You could be unreachable, and that was normal. There was trust, there was space, there was breath. The freedom to get lost and find oneself again. The slow, unhurried days that asked for nothing except curiosity. Ready for the next memory? There was a place in my neighborhood, a kind of unofficial meeting point that every kid from the 70s had somewhere in their own town. Ours was an old vacant lot behind Mr. Thompson's hardware store, a patch of dried dirt, overgrown weeds, and half-buried bottle caps that glittered like treasure under the sun. To anyone else it was nothing, but to us it was everything. A kingdom, a battlefield, a place where imagination ruled louder than any adult voice ever could. I can still hear the crunch of our footsteps as we crossed through the broken fence, the wood rough beneath our palms, the wire twirling in the breeze with a soft metallic whistle. The lot was wild and imperfect, exactly the way a childhood sanctuary should be. The scent of dry earth mixed with the faint smell of oil drifting from the hardware shop. Grasshoppers clicked in the tall weeds, bees hovered lazily over patches of clover, and above it all, the sky stretched out, huge and fearless, unbothered by the world below. We'd drop our bikes in a messy tangle, their chains rattling, their kickstands never quite doing their job. Every day, like clockwork, someone would find a stick long enough to become a sword. Someone else would spot a rock shaped like a dinosaur egg. And suddenly, the whole lot transformed into jungles, alien planets, ancient kingdoms. We didn't need screens to transport us. A cloud shaped like a dragon was enough to set an entire afternoon on fire. The sun would heat my face until I had to squint. The air buzzed with cicadas, those relentless singers of summer whose songs somehow made the world feel slower, deeper. I'd close my eyes, and for a moment I believed the world was exactly as vast as it felt. There were no helmets, no adults telling us to be careful, no warnings about the dangerous things that shaped us into stronger kids. We climbed trees with branches that creaked under our weight. We balanced on rusty pipes. We dug trenches with our bare hands, convinced we were uncovering ancient civilizations. And every cut, every bruise, every scar became a small badge of honor, proof that we had lived that day fully. We talked about dreams, monsters, the mysteries of the universe, and the strange adults in our neighborhood. There were no phones buzzing in our pockets, no interruptions pulling us away. When you were there, fully present. Your body, your mind, your imagination, all in one place. Sometimes we'd lay in the dirt and watch ants carry crumbs 10 times their size, mesmerized by their tiny determination. Sometimes we'd find an old soda can and crush it flat just to hear that metallic crack that echoed so satisfyingly in the air. These small moments, insignificant to the rest of the world, were the building blocks of our memories, where the outdoors wasn't a destination but our natural habitat. If you're feeling that familiar tug in your chest, that warm ache of remembering something you didn't even know you missed, stay with me. Because the story of our freedom, the real freedom, is just beginning. There was a stretch of road near my neighborhood that felt almost enchanted, long, cracked and winding, bordered by tall oaks that shook their leaves like whispered secrets. We called it the Endless Road, even though it couldn't have been more than a mile long, but in the 1970s, distance felt different. A mile could feel like a journey. A single afternoon could feel like an era, and that road, it was where we tasted a kind of freedom that felt almost holy. The wind would press against my face, warm and thick, carrying the scent of tar, wildflowers, and the faint musk of the nearby creek. If I close my eyes right now, I can still taste that mixture. A little sweet, a little dirty, completely unforgettable. The sunlight filtered through the trees in broken streams, like old film flickering across a projector screen. It created patterns on the ground that danced beneath my wheels. Every ride down that road felt like entering a different world, one where the responsibilities of adulthood didn't exist, where time didn't chase me, where my mind was nothing but open sky. The buzzing of insects weaving through the air, the crunch of cicada shells under my tires, the distant barking of a dog I'd never actually seen, but somehow felt familiar. Every sound had weight, every silence had meaning. Being alone wasn't scary, it was freeing. It was like the world was giving me permission to simply be. Other times, I rode with friends, a messy pack of kids with scraped knees and sunburnt noses, shouting and racing as if our lives depended on it. We didn't ride in straight lines. We zigzagged, drifted, and laughed so loudly that the trees seemed to shake with us. There were no adults telling us to slow down, no cars honking at us to move aside. The road belonged to us, completely. The boards were rough and splintered, and we always warned the younger kids to watch their feet, even though none of us ever really did. When we rode across it, the wheels made that hollow, thunk, thunk, thunk sound that echoed beneath us like a heartbeat. To this day, I swear I've never heard a sound more comforting. We'd stop on that bridge, drop our bikes, and lean over the railing to stare at the creek below. The water moved slow, lazy, carrying leaves and the occasional soda tab downstream. Dragonflies hovered above the surface, their wings shimmering in the sunlight like bits of stained glass. Sometimes we'd toss in pebbles just to watch the ripples spread out in perfect circles. Those ripples always fascinated me, how something so small could disturb the entire surface of the water. Back then, I didn't realize that we, too, were creating ripples in our own lives, shaping memories that would echo for decades. I remember the warmth of the wooden railing under my arms, the faint smell of algae rising from the creek, the way the sunlight turned everything golden for a few fleeting seconds. We'd talk about things that felt enormous at the time. What superpower we'd choose, which grown-up job sounded the least boring, whether the world ended past the county line. Our voices mixed with the gentle murmur of water, forming a kind of music that only children could create. And then, when the moment felt right, we'd hop back on our bikes and push forward, letting the road pull us deeper into the afternoon. There was always a point, usually late in the ride, when the sun got softer, the air cooler, and something inside us whispered that the day was beginning to fade. But we didn't rush home, not yet. We savored those last minutes as if holding on to them might make them last forever. The feeling of being young in a time when life felt safe, spacious, and full of wonder. There was a certain magic that only the late afternoons of the 1970s carried, a kind of slow-burning glow that settled over everything like a soft blanket. By the time the sun began its descent, the entire neighborhood shifted into a different rhythm. Shadows stretched long across the lawns, cicadas grew louder, and the air cooled just enough to make your skin tingle. That's when we knew the best part of the day was beginning. The sidewalks radiated a gentle warmth, still holding onto the heat of the day. I could feel the soles of my shoes soften against the pavement. Every house smelled like something different: cut grass, barbecue smoke, laundry soap drifting from open windows. The world felt lived in, familiar, intimate. Like every doorstep had a story, every backyard a secret. The moment you stepped inside, you were swallowed by a smell that doesn't exist anymore. A mix of licorice, cardboard, bubblegum, and cold air from the ancient humming freezer in the back. It smelled like childhood itself. He had a calmness about him, the kind of quiet presence that made you feel safe without him saying a single word. He knew every kid by name, even the ones who tried to sneak candy into their pockets. And somehow, he always pretended not to notice. Or maybe he genuinely didn't care. In those days, adults weren't suspicious of kids. They understood us. They saw us. Other times I'd choose a pack of baseball cards, hoping for one of the players everyone on the block argued about. But more often than not, I'd just stand there for a moment, letting the cool air wrap around me, listening to the low rumble of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Outside, my friends would be waiting, sitting on the curb with candies melting in their palms. The street felt alive. Kids riding in crooked circles, a dog barking at nothing, a radio playing some soft rock tune from an open garage. Parents watered their lawns with long green hoses, their shadows swaying as they slowly moved the spray back and forth. The droplets caught the sunlight, turning into tiny rainbows for a few fleeting seconds. I used to stop and watch them, fascinated by how something so ordinary could look so magical. We'd gather on someone's front porch, legs dangling over the steps, trading stories about who fell off their bike, who found a dead snake by the creek, who spotted a strange car near the woods. Every story was exaggerated, dramatic, bursting with unnecessary details. But that was the point. We weren't just talking, we were building worlds out of words, worlds where we were the heroes, the adventurers, the storytellers. Fireflies were just starting to appear, blinking on and off in the dimming light. We tried to catch them barefoot in the grass, feeling the blades tickle our ankles, listening to the soft thud of our footsteps. The laughter, the applause, the announcer's voice, they blended with the evening in a way that felt comforting. Back then, even the sound of someone else's television felt like community. Sadness because another day was ending. Peace because the ending itself felt so gentle, so natural, so right. Night is coming, and with it the memories become even deeper. As the last traces of sunlight slipped behind the rooftops, the entire neighborhood seemed to exhale. A long, gentle sigh that marked the true beginning of evening in the 1970s. There was something sacred about that moment, something that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. The world grew softer, quieter, almost shy. Streetlights flickered awake one by one, buzzing faintly like sleepy fireflies trying to remember how to glow. My bike lay in the grass, abandoned for the night, glinting faintly under the first hints of artificial light. The air smelled different now, less like sun and sweat, more like damp earth, charcoal cooling from someone's grill, and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle carried on the breeze. These were smells that marked the shift from adventure to reflection, from play to something quieter, deeper. The sky darkened into that deep, endless blue that only existed before full nightfall. Fireflies floated through the yards like drifting stars that had decided to get a little closer, inviting us to chase them, catch them, release them again. Their soft glow made the whole world feel enchanted. I can still hear the distant murmurs of families settling in, a screen door slamming, the clinking of dishes being washed, laughter from a living room glowing with the warm, flickering light of a wood-paneled television. And if the wind was just right, you could catch pieces of conversations, small, ordinary words that somehow made the evening feel even more intimate. The neighborhood wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing organism, each house a heartbeat. The night had its own adventures, its own secrets to offer. Sometimes we'd wander down the street in a loose group, kicking pebbles, talking about nothing and everything. Our voices stayed low, as if respecting the quiet magic unfolding around us. The world felt bigger at night, the shadows deeper, the air cooler, the stars brighter. There was a sense of possibility that hovered above us like a whisper. Anything could happen, even if nothing ever really did. We'd sit there, arms resting over the top rail, staring at the sky as if we expected answers to fall from it. Above us, the stars multiplied, shimmering like tiny memories waiting to be born. We didn't know the constellations. We didn't need to. It was enough just to look up. I can still feel that quiet awe settling in my chest, a feeling that the universe was vast but gentle, and that we, small as we were, belonged to it. Back then, the dark wasn't something to fear. It was something to trust. The night cradled us, wrapped around us like a soft blanket, and in that blanket there was room for dreams to take shape. Dreams that felt simple, pure, impossibly big. We laughed at the ridiculous shapes, the exaggerated movements, the way our shadows stretched and wavered. It felt like we were bending reality, reshaping it with nothing but our hands and a beam of light. About what we wanted to be when we grew up, which ironically none of us ever became. I remember thinking that adulthood sounded so far away, like something that would happen to another version of me in a different lifetime. And in many ways, it did. Not exhaustion, just a soft awareness that the day had been lived fully, that our hearts were full, that our minds were ready to dream. One by one, porch lights clicked on. Parents called names into the darkness, their voices familiar and warm, carrying that tone that meant, "It's time." And as I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, feeling the cool air brush against my skin, I always felt an odd mix of gratitude and longing. Even as a child, gratitude for the day I had lived, longing for it not to end. Looking back now, I realize those evenings were the soul of our childhood, gentle, unhurried, filled with an innocence that felt infinite. There was a moment every single night in the 1970s when the world seemed to pause, a quiet, delicate stillness that settled over everything just before true darkness arrived. It was the moment when porch lights buzzed softly, when the last streaks of daylight faded into a velvety blue, and when the air cooled enough for a tiny shiver to trail up your arms. That moment was ours. It belonged to the kids who lingered outside just a little longer than we were supposed to. I remember standing in the middle of the street, the pavement cool under my bare feet, feeling as though the whole world had taken one long breath and surrendered to the night. Streetlights cast yellow halos on the ground, soft rings of warmth that felt almost protective. Moths danced clumsily around the lights, tapping against the glass like tiny creatures entranced by their own longing. The houses around me grew dim, except for the warm, flickering glow of televisions behind thin curtains. It was like peeking into 100 little stories playing out at once. By that hour, the neighborhood kids had drifted into loose groups, like constellations, forming and reforming in the dimness. Some sat on curbs, dragging sticks along the cracks in the pavement. Others sprawled across their lawns, staring up at the stars, as if expecting one to fall. The night had a way of slowing our voices, deepening our thoughts, making even the silliest conversation feel strangely profound. The faint notes of a guitar from a teenage brother trying to impress no one in particular, and always, in the background, the soft hum of the cicadas, steady, hypnotic, like the heartbeat of summer itself. There was a house near the end of the block where the yard was always just a little too dark, the kind of place older kids claimed was haunted. We'd dare each other to walk up to the porch, to touch the mailbox, to peek in the window. And even though the house was perfectly ordinary, the thrill of creeping toward it in the dark filled us with a delicious, trembling excitement. Our hearts pounded, our breath rushed, and every rustle of leaves made us freeze. It wasn't fear, not really. It was the joy of feeling alive, of testing the edges of our courage under the forgiving blanket of night. I loved the feeling of crouching behind a tree, body pressed against the rough bark, heartbeat echoing in my ears as I waited for the seeker to pass. The grass beneath my hands felt damp and cool. The smell of soil and leaves filled my nose. And in the distance, the streetlights flickered like guardians watching over all of us. We talked about the stars, the universe, the strange feeling of growing older, even though we didn't understand what it meant. Someone would point to the sky and say, "Do you think we'll remember this when we're grown?" And we all said yes, because how could we not? It felt impossible that a moment so perfect, so gentle, could ever fade. And those nights, they shine brighter now than they ever did then. I'd stand up slowly, brushing dirt from my legs, taking one last look at the street, the stars, the glowing windows of the houses that held the people who formed my entire world. I didn't know it then, but I was memorizing everything. A breeze touched the back of my neck, and the warmth of the day finally slipped away. The quiet miracle of simply existing under the same sky with people who understood us without needing words. Block 8 enters the quiet corners of 1950s life, the rituals that weren't glamorous, weren't photographed, weren't spoken of in magazines, yet built the emotional architecture of American homes. These were the fragile, invisible threads that held families together, even when no one noticed. There was a ritual, simple and universal, that played out across millions of kitchens, the nightly closing of the house. It began when the last TV show ended and the screen dimmed into a soft glow. Fathers would walk through the rooms, turning off lamps one by one, each soft click a signal that the day was ending. Mothers would wipe the counter, even if it was already clean, as if restoring order to the world before sleep. Children brushed their teeth under warm yellow bulbs, the mirror fogged slightly from someone's earlier bath. It wasn't a rule. No one announced it, but every night these movements unfolded with quiet precision. These simple gestures told every member of the household that they were safe, that tomorrow would arrive unchanged, dependable. In the 1950s, Americans locked their doors not out of fear, but out of habit, a way of telling the universe, our little world is complete now, let nothing disturb it. Fathers often performed this themselves, jiggling the knob twice just to be sure. Some would step out onto the porch for a brief moment and inhale the night air, listening to the distant hum of a passing car or the rustle of leaves under a streetlight. These were small acts of stewardship, of guardianship. They spoke of responsibility, of a quiet, masculine tenderness that rarely found words. And then came one of the most forgotten rituals, the final goodnight call. Parents didn't shout down hallways or speak from room to room. They walked, they visited, they opened the bedroom door, even if only a crack, and whispered, "Good night, sweetheart." Now, it didn't matter if the child was already asleep. The ritual mattered more than the response. It was a way of anchoring the child's heart, reminding them, without ceremony, that they were loved, seen, and protected. In many homes, these good nights were paired with a soft hand smoothing blankets or a brief kiss on the forehead, still warm from the day's adventures. It was tenderness delivered in silence, in darkness. Long before children stirred or alarms rang, mothers often woke quietly and stood by the kitchen window. They watched the sky lighten, the mist lift from the grass, the neighborhood stretch into being. Before any chore, before any voice spoke, they claimed a moment for themselves, a breath, a pause, a private greeting to the new day. This moment was rarely acknowledged, yet it shaped the emotional temperature of the home. Their calm, their stillness, became the house's foundation. The low bubbling echoed through the kitchen, filling the air with a warmth that gently awakened the senses. Fathers often sat at the table reading the newspaper, while mothers cracked eggs or set out toast. Nothing extraordinary happened, but that was the beauty of it. These quiet fragments of routine whispered to each family member, "Life is steady. Life is ours. Life is shared." There is a particular kind of memory that whispers rather than speaks, one built not from events, but from textures, sounds, and atmospheres. Block 9 enters those sensory rituals of the 1950s, the ones that shaped the emotional landscape of childhood without anyone realizing it. These were the rhythms that defined not just what life looked like, but what it felt like. Mothers stepped outside with aprons still tied around their waists, shaking dust from rugs with a sharp thwack that echoed down the street. This wasn't just cleaning. It was a social signal, a way of letting neighbors know, we're here, we're awake, we're caring for our home. Children watched from their bikes or from the edges of lawns, understanding without words that this weekly ritual brought order to the world. Maybe it was a baseball game, the play-by-play filling the air with a sense of thrill and continuity. Maybe it was a crooner singing through static. Perry Como, Nat King Cole, Dean Martin, voices that wrapped the neighborhood in a warm blanket. Radios weren't background noise in the 1950s, they were companions. They told families what time it was, what mood the day held, what the country was dreaming of. A song drifting through summer air could stop a child in their tracks or make a mother sway slightly while she hung laundry. It was a ritual of connection, one house sending sound into the world, others receiving it, all sharing the same invisible thread. Children playing outside could identify which home was making pot roast, whose mum was baking apple pie, who was using cinnamon today. These scents weren't just smells, they were emotional messages. They said, someone cares enough to make something from scratch. Someone is investing time in nourishment, in family, in love. Today, when food is rushed and convenience-driven, the slow ritual of cooking feels almost sacred. Fathers read the newspaper or tinkered in the garage. Mothers embroidered, wrote letters, or simply sat on the couch, with a cup of tea cooling beside them. Children sprawled on the floor with comic books, tracing the pictures with their fingertips. No one rushed. No one filled the silence out of discomfort. The quiet itself was the ritual, a soft container that held the family together and allowed each person to breathe. They sat on wooden steps, metal chairs, or porch swings that squeaked in slow arcs. The sound of cicadas rose and fell like a breathing organism. A bicycle wheel clicked softly as a kid circled the block one last time. Streetlights flickered on with a gentle buzz. This moment, the whole neighborhood bathed in honey-colored light, was the day's final exhale, and everyone, consciously or not, participated. They offered a structure of belonging that didn't need to be spoken, because it was felt, deeply, quietly, every day. If there is one thing people today rarely talk about, mostly because they've forgotten how it truly felt, it's the ritual of being unreachable. In the 1950s, no one could contact you unless you were home. There was no buzzing in your pocket, no screen lighting up with someone else's urgency. When you stepped outside, the world didn't follow you. It waited. It paused. It respected the boundaries of your presence in a way life rarely does now. I remember stepping onto the sidewalk and feeling a strange kind of lightness, a quietness inside my own head. The world was simple, clean even, in the absence of constant interruptions. The air felt wider. Thoughts moved slower, like clouds drifting above the rooftops. That unreachability created a freedom that shaped the emotional core of our childhood, an internal spaciousness children today will never quite understand. Nobody needed to know exactly where you were. You didn't send updates. You didn't check in. Trust was the invisible glue of the era. Quiet, sturdy, unquestioned. Through fields of tall grass that scratched our ankles and smelled of earth warmed by the sun, that wandering opened the imagination like nothing else. It taught children how to think, how to dream, how to explore without a map. You followed the sound of laughter, or the echoes of a bouncing ball, or the metallic ring of a bike's bell. That sound alone could pull you across the entire neighborhood, guiding you to where everyone else had gathered. We didn't text, "I'm on my way." We didn't plan. We arrived because the world itself called us. And when we finally found each other, the world transformed. Suddenly the street became a baseball field, with chalky white lines scraped onto the asphalt by pieces of broken rock. A vacant lot became a fortress, a castle, or a battlefield. Someone's old cardboard box turned into a rocket ship, a race car, a secret hideout. We had so little, and yet our imaginations filled in everything the physical world lacked. All that mattered was the moment, the story we were weaving together, the world we were building with our own hands and minds. You could hear the emotion in it, sometimes stern, sometimes tender, always familiar. It was a sound that marked the passage of time, signaling the end of the day's adventures. Porch lights blinked on one by one, forming a chain of warm halos down the street. The air cooled, wrapping around your skin like a gentle reminder that childhood had a rhythm, a beginning, a middle, an end. But for those few minutes, those in-between footsteps, life felt suspended, as if you were walking through the very heart of memory itself. It gave us a childhood that belonged not to screens or schedules, but to the earth beneath our feet and the sky above our heads. As night stretched across the neighborhood, a quiet transformation took place. The world, as we had known it, began to slip away, replaced by something that felt sacred, almost mysterious, the time between dusk and full dark. It was during this time that the neighborhood, and perhaps the entire world, seemed to belong more to the children than the adults. It was a space where the day's noise faded and the soft whispers of the night began, as if the earth itself was exhaling. This was the hour of transition. The heat of the day would recede and a coolness would settle in. It wasn't the cold of winter, but that warm, gentle kind of coolness that touched the skin and made everything feel softer, more serene. You could feel the world breathe with you. Their yellow glow didn't have the sharp intensity of modern lights. Instead, they bathed the neighborhood in a warm, golden haze that made everything look a little dreamier, a little more magical. The pavement gleamed slightly with the lingering moisture of the evening air, and the sound of crickets began to swell in the background, creating a natural symphony that carried on throughout the night. The quiet of the world would become a blanket that settled over everything, making the smallest noises, like the soft rustle of leaves or the distant hum of an old car, feel profound. No one hurried. No one was in a rush. The night was ours. The adults would still be inside, wrapping up their work, finishing the last bits of chores, or sitting with a drink in hand, catching up on the events of the day. But it was during this time, just before they too began to retire for the night, that we could sense the subtle shift. The street belonged to us, the kids. We had claimed this hour, this space, and for a while we were free. We could run barefoot across the grass, shout into the open air, or simply stare at the stars without anyone telling us to quiet down, to stop moving, or to be sensible. I think even as children, we could sense that life was simpler then, that somewhere in the history of this neighborhood, these same streets, these same trees, had seen countless generations walk through this same passage between day and night. It was like standing at the edge of something ancient and timeless, something larger than ourselves. The house was still warm inside, with the smells of dinner mixing with the cool evening air. Sometimes the smell of fresh bread or something baking would slip out through the open windows, making everything feel even more like home. We would pause on the sidewalk, a group of friends looking up at the moon. It wasn't just any moon, it was the moon, the same one that had illuminated the nights of our parents, our grandparents. Its light was the same, but our connection to it was uniquely our own. The night, the quiet, the space between dusk and full darkness. They created a kind of emotional space where our thoughts were allowed to roam, where we could share our hopes, our fears, and our dreams without worry. It was like the whole world paused with us, waiting to hear what we had to say. No one interrupted. No one rushed to silence us. We were allowed to exist in our thoughts, to be lost in the kind of creative freedom that only kids can experience. How we've lost the ability to step into the world and feel that weightless simplicity, that peace of simply being in the moment. In the 1970s, life had its rhythms, predictable and soft, like the music of a forgotten era, and we were a part of it. The world didn't ask us to keep up. It just let us be. It was where we realized that not everything had to be said aloud. Some things, like childhood, like freedom, like the deep bond we shared with the night, those things could only be felt. And in feeling them, we understood that they were ours forever. We were home in a way that only children can understand, unburdened, unbroken, and infinitely connected to the rhythm of the world. As the night settled in, the world grew even quieter. The sounds of our childhood, those endless shouts, the laughter that echoed through the streets, the clattering of bikes on sidewalks, began to fade, leaving only a gentle hum behind. The hum of memories, the hum of time passing, of people coming and going, of houses growing older, of lives evolving in ways we didn't fully understand then. Life in the 1970s wasn't always about the noise, the movement, the endless distractions we find ourselves surrounded by today. There was something profoundly beautiful in the stillness, the way the world allowed us to reflect on who we were, who we wanted to be, and the simple, enduring rhythms that carried us from one day to the next. The moonlight, filtering through the trees, had a silver glow, softer and more poetic than any light we see now. It was the same moon that had watched over every generation before ours, the same silent witness to the quiet wars, the small victories, the ordinary lives lived in between. When I look back on those nights, I realize now that it was the moonlight that taught us how to dream. It was the constant, ever-present companion that didn't need to speak. It simply was, offering us that same quiet confidence to simply exist. It was almost as if the world itself had a gentle way of telling us to savor the small things. The smell of fresh grass in the evening, the feeling of cool air brushing against your skin after a hot summer day, the soft hum of a fan in the window as you lay in bed, listening to the distant sounds of the world winding down. These weren't just everyday moments, they were the moments that anchored us, that made us feel that we were here, that we were part of something larger, something that had been going on long before we arrived and would continue long after we were gone. I can still feel the air of those nights in my lungs, the mixture of earth, grass, and summer that tasted sweet and alive. I can still remember the quiet hum of the neighborhood at night, where every house seemed to pulse with its own quiet heartbeat. The streetlights flickered and buzzed gently, casting long shadows across the yards, and somewhere, off in the distance, a dog barked softly, as if trying to guard the world from the silence. And there were moments, small moments, when we would gather by the corner, all of us standing in a circle, letting the darkness wrap itself around us, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath our feet. Sometimes we wouldn't speak at all. The cool night air would carry the weight of our thoughts. There was something incredibly powerful about those moments of shared silence. It felt like we were communing with something greater than ourselves, something that had been passed down generation after generation. We understood each other in a way that transcended language. Those were the bonds of childhood, the bonds that weren't based on anything material or even on shared experiences, but on the quiet understanding that we were all part of the same world. And as the night deepened, the stars above us seemed to grow brighter, each one burning with a quiet intensity, a reminder of the vastness of the universe, of the space we occupied in it, and the small yet undeniable significance of our lives. Those stars, so far away and yet so close, were more than just distant points of light. They were our way of reaching into the cosmos, asking questions that no one could answer, but hoping that somehow the universe would listen. The rituals of those nights, the slow transitions from day to night, the quiet hum of the world around us, formed the foundation of the way we understood the world. We didn't need to be told to slow down. We didn't need to be reminded to savor the small moments. It was built into the very fabric of those days, into every whisper of wind, every rustle of leaves, every flicker of light from a distant porch. It was the feeling of those memories, the quiet, reflective quality of those nights that stays with me. The way the world seemed to breathe in perfect harmony with our own heartbeat. The way we were allowed to simply be. The 1970s, for all its tumultuous changes, for all the noise and the revolution and the shifts in culture, offered us a moment in time when life could be simple, when we could stand under the stars, feel the weight of the world's silence, and know without a doubt that everything was as it should be. As I leave this moment behind, I invite you to take a deep breath and step into your own memories, your own rituals, because while time moves on and things change, there's a part of us, always, still there, living in the quiet, glowing under the moonlight, and finding comfort in the simplicity of being. There was another world within the 1970s, one that existed not in the daylight hours of wandering children or the golden hush of early evening, but in the deep quiet of the family home at night. It was a world shaped by dim lamps, murmured conversations, and the gentle hum of appliances that felt almost alive. When I think back on it now, it feels like stepping into a sacred chamber of memory, one lined with the textures, sounds, and rituals that defined the emotional architecture of childhood. But once the sun slipped away and the last voices from the street faded, a heavier stillness settled in. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a meaningful one, a silence that invited you to pause, to think, to imagine, to feel. It was the kind of quiet that wrapped around you like a blanket. I can still see the soft glow of the living room lamp, yellow light pooling across carpet fibers, creating shadows that felt gentle rather than ominous. The air held the faint scent of dinner and dish soap, blending with the subtle sweetness of old furniture wood, and somewhere in the background, the refrigerator hummed its steady, low melody. Even that sound, mundane as it seems now, was comforting. It meant the world was stable. It meant someone had stocked the shelves, someone had cooked, someone had made sure the house was filled with warmth and life. A single object could carry the emotions of an entire family. The framed photos on the wall, slightly crooked from being dusted earlier. The heavy curtains that swayed softly with the evening breeze slipping through a cracked window. The old television set sitting like a quiet elder in the corner, screen dark, yet full of unspoken memories. Each piece told a story, not loudly, not directly, but in quiet, intimate whispers. Other times they'd sit in silence, each lost in their thoughts, sharing a kind of companionship that didn't require words. That subtle, unspoken communication between adults was one of the first signs that there was a deeper world beneath the surface of life, one children could sense but not fully understand. For us kids, nighttime inside the house had its own rituals. We'd sit on the carpet, feeling the rough fibers scratch gently against our elbows, and play with toys that seemed to come alive in the dim light. We'd flip through comic books, tracing lines with our fingers, the pages soft and worn from being read countless times. The colors looked different at night, muted, nostalgic, almost washed in gold. It was as if the stories we loved belonged more to memory than to reality. The slow walk down the hallway, the creak of the wooden floorboards under bare feet, the coolness of the bedroom air after leaving the warmer living room. The shadows stretching across the walls, shaped by the moonlight filtering through thin curtains. The blankets smelled like detergent and childhood, soft and heavy in a way modern fabrics rarely are. When you slipped under those blankets, the world outside faded. You could hear the house making its nighttime noises, the settling of beams, the distant ticking of a clock, the muffled sound of your parents talking in the next room. These weren't just sounds, they were reassurances, proof that you were safe, that the world was steady, that the night was holding you gently in its arms. Small in the way a loved child feels small, protected, cradled by the universe. The darkness wasn't something to fear. It was something that belonged to you, something that carried your dreams with a tenderness that adulthood, years later, would make you ache for. They taught us silence. They taught us stillness. They taught us that life didn't always need to be filled with noise, stimulation, or movement to be full. Sometimes the most meaningful moments happen in the soft spaces, in the dim glow of a lamp, in the quiet hum of a refrigerator, in the muted laughter drifting from another room. The world today is louder, faster, sharper, but somewhere inside each of us, hidden beneath layers of modern life, still lives that child lying under a heavy blanket, listening to the house breathe, knowing that everything is okay, that the night is safe, that home is more than walls, it's a feeling. There was a special kind of magic in weekends during the 1970s, a magic that didn't announce itself with excitement or spectacle, but with a quiet sense of possibility. Saturdays felt like a deep breath the world finally allowed itself to take. And for us kids, it was the closest thing to freedom we ever knew. Freedom without fear, without supervision, without rules pressing down on us like invisible weight. It was the kind of freedom children today will only ever hear about, never truly feel in their bones. No notifications pulling you into someone else's urgency, just the warm, gentle glow of sunlight slipping through thin curtains, laying across your face like an invitation to simply exist. You could feel the warmth even before you opened your eyes. The house was quiet, but not silent. There was the distant clatter of dishes, the faint sound of a radio, playing something slow and warm, the gentle murmur of your parents' voices drifting from the kitchen. Toast crisping in the toaster, filling the air with that unmistakable, comforting aroma. Sometimes bacon, sometimes pancakes, sometimes nothing special at all. Just the smell of a house beginning to wake. There was a sense that life was in no rush, that we could take our time, that the day stretched out before us like a wide-open field. But the heart of Saturdays wasn't the morning. It was what came after. That moment when you ran outside, the screen door slamming behind you, and the entire neighborhood felt like one giant shared backyard. The sunlight had a different quality on weekends, brighter, fuller, almost expectant, as if it knew we were about to ask it for adventure. We'd gather without planning, just as we did every day. One kid would wander outside, and somehow, as if by gravitational pull, the others appeared. No texts, no schedules, no checking to see if someone was free. We were always free. Our time belonged to us, and the world felt like it belonged to us too. The streets were alive with possibility. You could hop on your bike and feel the wind tug at your shirt, the sun warming the back of your neck as the tires hummed against the pavement. The bike wasn't just a bike. It was a passport, a portal, a declaration of independence. You could go anywhere, do anything, and no one questioned it. Your freedom wasn't just permission, it was expected. We explored wooded trails, climbed over fences, wandered into empty lots, made forts out of fallen branches and abandoned planks. Entire worlds were built from nothing but dirt, imagination, and the unspoken agreement that we were all safe as long as we stayed together. Hours stretched like warm taffy, slow, sweet, endless. The sun would climb higher and higher until it hung directly above us, turning the pavement hot enough to burn the bottoms of our feet if we wandered too long without shoes. But even that was part of the joy. Running across the pavement with quick high steps, laughing at the heat, feeling the pulse of summer or spring or fall vibrate through the ground. You'd burst through the door, cheeks flushed, hair wild, clothes dusty, and your parents would simply look up and smile. Maybe they'd hand you a sandwich. Maybe they'd tell you to drink some water. Maybe they'd remind you to come back before the streetlights turned on. That was the only rule that mattered. The single golden rule that defined our freedom. Be home when the streetlights come on. It was a ritual that shaped us. A ritual that whispered, go explore, go wander, go be wild, but come back to the people who love you. Because when the sun dipped low and that warm golden glow slid across the neighborhood, something inside us stirred. Something old, something instinctive. The end of the day wasn't just a time, it was a feeling, a gentle tug at the heart. They were special because of who we were allowed to be. Children with open skies above us, open streets before us, and open hearts within us. Children who knew the world by touch, by dirt under our nails, by grass against our skin, by the burn of running too fast, by the laughter that spilled out of us without warning. As the story moves toward its final descent, the world of the late 80s begins to feel like a candle flickering in a room where someone has already opened the door to the future, letting in a draft of cold, unfamiliar air. There's a tension building. Subtle, almost unspoken, because everyone senses that life as they know it is about to shift. Yet no one can quite articulate how or why. It's simply an intuition, an ache in the background of everyday life. On a quiet suburban street, the sun sets in a slow burn of neon orange, bleeding into a violet sky. Colors that almost look artificial, as if painted by the same hands that crafted arcade screens and VHS tape glitches. Kids hurry home with their bikes, the streetlights turning on one by one in that magical sequence that once marked the unofficial beginning of nighttime freedom. But now, the glow feels different, more symbolic, almost melancholic. Inside one of these homes, a family sits together in their living room, not because they planned to, but because back then it was simply what people did. The TV hums softly, its analog static crackling like an old friend clearing its throat before speaking. A news anchor mentions global shifts, political tensions, economies trembling, but the family barely pays attention. The father ties fishing knots absent-mindedly, the mother folds laundry, the teenage daughter rewinds a cassette with a pencil, the son draws robots that look suspiciously like what the next decade will one day invent. There is comfort here, yes, but also an unspoken fear that this comfort is fragile. A police sign appears in a window where a record store once blasted Def Leppard. The food court smells the same, but the crowds feel thinner. The echo of laughter doesn't travel as far as it used to. They share fries, swap rumors, hold eye contact a second too long. They don't know that in the coming years, screens will divide them, algorithms will guide them, and human connection will become something curated instead of discovered. Tonight, all they know is the pulse of the music and the thrill of possibility. Outside, the world shifts again. And in the middle of all this, a man walks home alone after closing the video store where he works. He locks the door, pockets the key, and looks back through the glass at the rows of movie cases, bright, colorful, full of stories. Stories humans chose, rewound, held in their hands. He feels a strange sadness, as if some part of him knows that this ritual, this physicality of storytelling, is living its final glowing chapter. One last flicker. The 80s aren't disappearing abruptly. They're exhaling, letting out a long, wistful breath as their vibrant colors begin to fade into the grayscale dawn of a new era. A breeze moves through the quiet streets, carrying the faint scent of summer lawns, asphalt warmed by the sun, and the unmistakable plastic aroma of old toys left on porches. It brushes against wind chimes that sing a nostalgic tune. Soft, delicate, almost sacred. Inside a dim bedroom, a teenager lies awake staring at posters of rock gods and movie heroes pinned to the wall. These were not merely images, they were maps to different worlds, invitations to dream bigger than the life outside their window. Tonight, however, the posters feel like relics, almost too quiet, too still. The teenager senses something shifting, a feeling he cannot name. He doesn't know that generations from now, people will cling to these very moments like lifelines, desperate to feel what he is feeling right now without even realizing it. The father sips coffee in silence. The mother runs her fingers over a newspaper headline about technological leaps, global changes, new uncertainties. They're not afraid, not exactly, but they are aware. Aware that the world their children will inherit will not be as gentle or as predictable as the one they grew up in. Aware that something is slipping away, something that cannot be captured by photographs or preserved in scrapbooks. Their movements are small but genuine, two bodies holding on to a moment they know will never return. The bartender wipes glasses in a rhythm that suggests routine, but his eyes are a little misty. He grew up with these songs. They were the soundtrack of his youth, and he can feel the era closing like a book in his hands. Meanwhile, in a lonely gas station, the attendant restocks candy bars, noticing the packaging changes, the creeping modern designs replacing the simple, bold colors of his childhood shelves. Even the candy looks different now, more polished, more calculated, less fun. In one final pocket of quiet, a young boy sits on the living room carpet with a VHS tape rewinding in the VCR. The mechanical whirring is steady, comforting, like the heartbeat of the decade itself. He waits patiently, not knowing that this ritual will soon vanish forever, that one day movies will live in clouds instead of boxes, and the act of rewinding, a small but meaningful ceremony, will become nothing more than a story older generations tell. And for a brief, final moment, the 80s are alive again, bright, loud, imperfect human. They settle into people's memories like fireflies caught in jars, flickering, warm, eternal, waiting to be opened again by anyone brave enough to remember.